Episode 7, Chapter 6. Chapter 6. The room that Link entered was dimly lit by paper lanterns hanging from the ceiling support beams. The walls were adorned with various paintings and tapestries, many of which featured the ancient Sheikah eye. Down the center of the entry room was a long, dark blue rug, and small, square pillows lined it on either side, forming neat rows that all seemed to face the central dais, which was situated at the opposite end of the room. A large, brass eye hung above the dais, and several pillows had been stacked on it to form a seat for the Sheikah elder, who now sat upon those pillows. Link slowly stepped forward, noticing that the younger woman, who Link thought was rather pretty, with her long white hair pulled up into a heart-shaped top knot, while the rest flowed down around her shoulders, stood off to the side of the dais. She had her hands clasped over her heart and looked anxious. When she noticed Link looking at her, her face turned very pink, and she quickly looked away. Link slowly approached the old woman, whom he assumed was the Impa that he sought. She looked, well, ancient. Her face and hands, the only parts of her body visible to Link under her traditional Sheikah garb, were heavily wrinkled, and she had walked with a bow to her back, leaning heavily on her cane. So? Impa said, her lips curling into a slightly toothless smile. She looked up at Link, fixing him with kindly grey eyes. You're finally awake. He was able to see the purple Sheikah eye tattooed on her forehead now. It has been quite some time, Link. Link hesitantly approached and knelt on the ground before her so that he could look into her eyes better. The corners of her eyes crinkling as she smiled wider. You are Impa, Link said, his voice soft. I am much older now, of course, but... Impa looked at him, considering. Do you remember me? Link's eyes fell to the ground, and he gave a small shake of his head. Impa sighed softly, her eyebrows knitting together in a frown. Do you have any memories of before? Link grimaced, clenching his hands into fists. It feels as though my body remembers the sword feels natural in my hand, and when I fight... He trailed off, falling silent for a time. But I have no memories of... before. The old woman pondered, looking at him with her sharp eyes. That may, perhaps, be a blessing in disguise. Link looked back up at her in surprise. I'm not sure that many people would like to remember the moment of their death. Link felt a chill run down his spine. I died. Close enough to it, Impa said. You defended Princess Zelda until you could stand no longer. After that, she used her holy powers to protect you long enough to give directions to have you placed in a sacred slumber. The Shrine of Resurrection. Yes. So you know what that is, then good. After you were placed in the shrine, she went, alone, to face Ganon. Before she went, however, Princess Zelda entrusted me with the task of guiding you when you awoke. She has, a plan to defeat Ganon, and she believed that you will play a critical role in that plan. I have been waiting 100 years, Link. 100 years and I have kept the princess' message, telling no one of her intent, lest we lose the element of surprise. Why you told me, grandmother, the younger woman piped up. Her voice trembled, as if she was nervous to speak. Well, yes, I told you and your mother before you, child, Impa said, suddenly sounding somewhat exasperated. Of course, I would not risk losing such important information when the future of Hyrule depends on it. But I have kept it within our family. Now. Go. I wish to speak to Link alone. The woman yelped and blushed furiously. I thought that I would. Right. She quickly turned and hurried away. Link noted that she did not go outside, though, but instead, hurried up the stairs beside the central dais. Now where was I? My old memory just isn't what it used to be, Impa said. When Link looked at her, a little startled by this revelation, she grinned. That grin faded after a moment, however, and her expression became grave. Before I go any further, I know that you must have many questions, and you are likely not at all sure of your place in all of this. It does not give me any pleasure to admit to you that I am about to place more burden upon your shoulders. If you wish to rest after your journey, this can wait until the morning. I have already waited 100 years, after all what is one more night? Link considered this offer, glancing down at the blue-patterned carpet. He saw that it was stylized with the Sheikah eye, though these eyes were more diamond-shaped than the others he had seen. Finally, he looked up. I met King Roam on the Great Plateau. Impa's eyes widened. He asked me to save his daughter. And is that your intent? Yes. If I was, her appointed knight, then it is my duty to do so.
Impa smiled warmly and slapped her knees.
Not a memory to your name, yet you are as intent as ever to charge forward with only courage and duty on your side. You have not changed a bit, Link. Once a hero, always a hero, it seems.
Link felt his face flush. He certainly did not feel like a hero. To him, he felt as though he had to do this. He felt as though he owed a debt. The princess had apparently saved his life. How could he not try to save hers, in turn, even if deep down, he feared that it would be a fruitless gesture?
Very well,
Impa said, growing serious once again.
Why don't you tell me what the old king told you, and I will do what I can to fill in some of the gaps. Then we shall discuss the princess' task entrusted to you and you alone.
Link recounted the tale given to him by King Roam, and Impa nodded thoughtfully before telling her own version of the events in a much more practiced air than the king used. She told him of the countless times throughout history that Ganon had been revived or broken free of his bonds, and the equal number of times that the princess who carried the blood of the goddess, and the hero, wielding the sword of legend, fought back against Ganon, sealing him once again. She revealed a tapestry on the wall behind her. It showed a creature not unlike the beast that flew around Hyrule Castle, surrounded on either side by a man wielding a blue sword and a woman dressed in yellow, as well as hundreds of what appeared to be guardians. In each of the four corners was another creature, each shaped like a different animal, an eagle, a salamander, an elephant, and a camel, and riding each of these animals was another being, indistinct in its features. She told him of the conflict against Ganon 10,000 years prior, when her ancestors, at the peak of their advanced technology, had created the Guardians and the four divine beasts. The Guardians had protected the hero and princess, while the four divine beasts attacked Ganon, weakening him greatly. The hero struck Ganon down, and the princess, using her goddess powers, sealed Ganon away again.
100 years ago,
Impa continued, her voice softening.
We strove to follow in our ancestors' wake. A prophecy foretold the return of Ganon, so we sought out the guardians and divine beasts of old. We spent years researching and planning, yet, despite it all, we underestimated Ganon's power and cunning.
Link knew what had come next. Ganon had taken control of the divine beasts and the guardians, turning them against him and Princess Zelda, and massacring the citizens of Hyrule along the way.
If Ganon is so powerful, how am I supposed to defeat him? That is where the princess plan comes into play,
Impa said, her eyes narrowing some.
Princess Zelda believes that it might still be possible to free the divine beasts from Ganon's control.
Link's heart began to sink as she continued.
So her final wish before leaving to seal Ganon was for you, when you awoke, to go to the divine beasts and free them of Ganon's malice. I see. It would be ill-advised to try to face Ganon now, as you are, without the legendary sword, and without the assistance of the divine beasts. He has already proven ready for such an attack and I fear he will just turn all of his machines against you again if you try.
Impa looked at Link then, frowning, and seemed to take pity on him. Her voice softened.
I am not sure what the princess saw when her powers awakened. She seemed to be more aware of what had happened. I believe that the goddess revealed some hidden truths to her. She believed in you, Link. She believed that you would be able to cleanse the divine beasts and restore them to their original functionality.
Link remained silent, considering this. Perhaps the princess had believed him capable, but surely she had not known that he would lose his memories in the process.
Oh, she knew that it was a possibility, Link,
Impa said after he said as much to her. She slowly rose from her pillow seat, making her way down off the dais with careful steps. She walked to Link's kneeling form and placed a hand against his shoulder.
And she hoped that you would eventually recover your memories. But regardless, she still believed that you would be our best hope to defeat Ganon once and for all. But why? Why me? Why was I chosen? Because you are the only one who can.
Link fell silent once again, disturbed by that statement. If he was the only hope for Hyrule, then he feared Hyrule was doomed indeed.
Princess Zelda hoped that the images that she left on the Sheikah slate might help you recall some of your memories. Have you had a chance to look at them yet?
Link looked back up at Impa, frowning.
Images.
He reached down to his belt, unhooking the Sheikah slate. He held it out to Impa at her insistence, who took it and frowned, her fingers tapping the screen.
Don't hit the blue one.
Link warned, suddenly worried that she might accidentally destroy her house by accident. Impa glanced at him with an amused smirk. She frowned after a moment, though, and looked back down at the Sheikah slate.
The camera is not here. I don't understand. When she was using this, that was the only rune available. Now, there are many more runes, yet no.
Impa sighed and looked at Link.
Perhaps my sister, Pura, might be of some assistance.
Impa nodded and her fingers flicked across the screen rapidly until, finally, she turned it around to show him. It was on the map, and Link could clearly see the icon that indicated his currently location. Impa had added another marker, however, some distance away, to the southeast. It was probably at least a day or two's journey, by Link's estimation, though his understanding of the distances being presented by the map wasn't exact.
Pura lives here, in Hateno village. She's dedicated her life to studying ancient Sheikah technology, the Sheikah slate and its runes, in particular, and it is possible that she may be able to restore some additional functionality to your Sheikah slate.
Link took the Sheikah slate from Impa, frowning down at the blinking yellow icon that she had added.
Wouldn't it be better for me to start towards the divine beasts?
Impa smiled faintly and placed a hand on the Sheikah slate.
Link. This device is a treasure and will likely be a valuable tool for you on your journey. And I happen to know that, in this device, the princess worked to ensure you would have a place to start from when recovering your memories. If you wish to continue on towards the nearest divine beast, I will not stop you. I might even commend you for your dedication. But we need to do everything we can to be prepared. Repairing this Sheikah slate could ultimately prove invaluable.
Impa paused, considering.
Besides, it may be good for you to visit Hateno village, anyway.
Link gazed at her for several moments, but she did not elaborate further. He looked back at the yellow dot on his map and, finally, nodded. He stood, clipping the Sheikah slate to his belt.
I'll go there first, then. I don't mean start towards the village now, you foolish boy.
Impa exclaimed, eyes widening.
By the gods above, you look like you're about to fall over where stand honestly, 100 years, and you haven't changed in the slightest. I'd like to think I've gotten wiser with my years.
Impa took his arm and pulled him back down into a seated position.
Paya. I know you're listening up there. Make us some tea. It's not Garudo tea, is it?
Link said, feeling a sudden rush of heat in the back of his throat. Impa gave him a strange look before shaking her head.
Now. Tell me all that has happened to you since you woke.
The next morning, Link emerged from the village inn, feeling far more refreshed than he had the day before. With some help from Kato, Link had been able to bathe, finally, and Kato allowed Link to wear one of his Sheikah robes after the bath while Paya had been instructed to wash Link's clothing. He had tied his hair back into a tail with some blue twine, though he left his bangs to hang down, as well as the hair over his sideburns. It felt right like that. His wounds sustained during his battles had been inspected by a man that claimed to be the village healer. His forearm had been covered with some foul-smelling salve, then was wrapped in a new piece of cloth. His new horse had also been cared for, fed and watered while Link was still speaking with Impa. When he walked out of the inn, he found himself feeling a strange contentment as he observed the bustle of the busy farming village. A young boy hurried by, carting manure in a wooden wheelbarrow, and, up the hill, an ox bayed as it pulled a plow across a new field. A young Sheikah child, a little girl, ran past Link, laughing and calling for her sister to catch her. Another child, a few years older and presumably her sister, chased after her. As he glanced around, he spotted a young woman standing near the doorway of the building next door, which Link had discovered carried archery supplies. The woman smiled warmly at him and winked. Link felt his face grown warm and cleared his throat, turning. He saw Telma busying herself with her cart, tying supplies back down. From what he could see, it looked as though she had done fairly well in selling through many of the supplies that she had brought, as well as picking up new items to sell elsewhere. When Telma saw him approaching, she stood up straight and smiled broadly at him.
Link. I'm glad you're here. I have some things to give you.
Telma got down from her cart and waved him over. Link obliged, walking over to her.
I never really thanked you properly for saving my life back there, so I found some things that I thought you might need on your journey.
Telma had gathered a small pile of supplies. Link's eyes widened when he saw the things that she had gathered for him. On top, he saw a new tunic, red with white and green accents. There was another shirt under that as well, this one green with long sleeves. He also saw new tan trousers and a pair of boots and socks. There was also a dark blue hood with a short cape. She also gathered him pieces of leather armor, a pair of leather vambraces, a shoulder guard, and a chest guard. Amazingly, he also saw a new bow in the style wielded by the Sheikah, and a new quiver full of arrows. Finally, rounding out the treasure trove of gifts was a new wooden shield emblazoned with the Sheikah eye.
Telma, you didn't? This is too much.
Link looked at her, eyes wide. Telma snorted and placed a hand on his shoulder.
If you hadn't been there, then I would have never survived that journey. You saved my life, and besides, from what I've heard since arriving here, you may save all of our lives again by the end of your journey.
She squeezed his shoulder tightly.
This is the least I can do.
Link felt a lump form in his throat, feeling suddenly overwhelmed by a feeling of shame. Did she truly think he could save Hyrule? He barely survived against 4 bokoblins. How was he supposed to destroy Ganon? He did not correct her, however, and finally nodded.
Thank you. I traded that other horse. I didn't think you would mind.
She nodded towards the small stable, where Spirit was being saddled with a new saddle and bridle.
I was able to get some new traveling gear and provisions for you.
Link saw that Spirit's saddle now had full saddlebags, as well as a bedroll strapped to it. Before Link could formulate another response, Telma drew Link into a tight embrace and then released him.
I'm going to be heading back out of the village within the hour. Would you like to travel back with me as far as the stable? I spoke to Impa and she told me that you would be heading east to Hateno, so it will be on your way. Yes, of course.
Link cleared his throat again and nodded.
I will get things ready.
An hour later, Link sat atop Spirit, feeling awkward once again as what seemed like the entire village turned out to see him off. He was dressed in his new tunic, which fit far better than the old shirt and trousers he had been wearing earlier. He was grateful to find that the new pieces of armor made it easier for him to strap his shield to his back, and he was able to strap his new bow to the saddle as well. All in all, he expected that traveling would prove easier now than it had been. He looked back towards Impa and saw her give a small nod. Next to her, Paya waved at Link before blushing and clasping her hands against her chest. Nodding in return, Link looked back forward and spurred Spirit into motion, riding out in front of Telma's cart. He tried to ignore the calls of encouragement from the gathered Sheikah as he rode out and was quite grateful when they entered the pass, leaving the village behind. The ride back to the Dueling Peak stable went by in relative silence and without incident. They stopped for lunch and to rest the horses in the afternoon, which was also when they cleared the pass leading away from Kakariko village. It was a good opportunity for Link to use his Sheikah slate to scout ahead, looking for any signs of ambush on the road ahead. After lunch, they got back onto the road, though Link rode out ahead of Telma's cart. Thankfully, no bokoblins or otherwise accosted them on this trip, and they made their way back to the Dueling Peaks stable by the time the sun had fallen behind the Dueling Peaks, plunging the valley into shadow. By the time they got back, it was clear that both Telma's horse, as well as Link's, were feeling exhausted from 2 days of riding such distances. Telma offered to pay to board and feed Link's horse for the night, which he gratefully accepted. She had also helped him determine how much each of the colored gems in his bag was worth, so he was able to pay for a night's rest in one of their beds without embarrassing himself. Not wishing to be interrogated by any other old guards, or to hear Telma telling of his exploits to anyone who would listen after she bought some drinks, he also paid for a small meal before walking back into the room that housed his bed. The day's riding had left him sore and weary, and he was eager to get some rest. Rest did not come easily that night, however, as Link was plagued with thoughts of his past failure. It didn't seem right that he should feel such shame for an event that he had no memory of, yet he could not escape it. So many people had already placed such faith in him, even waiting for 100 years for his return, and he felt no true confidence that he could succeed in this task given him. But how could he tell them that? He would try, of course. How could he not? But, deep down, he knew with certainty his journey would end in failure. He awoke with a start when he heard a rooster crow outside. Early dawn light had begun to filter in through the window slats in the room, and he saw that several of the other beds were still occupied by sleeping men who would likely be nursing hangovers when they awoke. Moving as silently as he could, Link rose and gathered up his belongings. When he reached the large dining room, he found that he wasn't the only one awake, but those that were awake did not seem very keen on talking to him. He was perfectly fine with this and made his way up to the counter in the center of the room. He paid for a breakfast of eggs and sausage and requested that Spirit be prepared for his departure. After eating his breakfast, he stepped out into the cool morning air, and was surprised to see Telma already inspecting her goods for her own departure, along with another man that he assumed to be her normal guard.
Already hurrying out?
She said when she saw him. He nodded and she smiled. Telma stepped over to him, placing a hand around his shoulder, leading him away from her guard.
I know you've got a long journey ahead of you. Know that I have said nothing of who you truly are. I am quite capable of keeping a secret.
Link felt an immense relief at these words and he thanked her. At least he would not have to worry about feeling those eyes upon him as he was leaving the stable.
Link,
Telma stopped and turned towards him with a grave expression on her face.
I do not know everything that Impa told you. But you are the master of your own destiny. I cannot imagine what it must be like in your position, and the pressure you are feeling is probably overwhelming. I would certainly not blame you if you decided to take a different path.
Link met her eyes and then looked down.
If not me, then who?
Telma squeezed his shoulder firmly.
I don't know, son. But we've survived this long. I am sure we will find a way to survive still.
Survive? Was this surviving? The last of the Hylians seemed to occupy a small corner of Hyrule, as did each of the other races from what Link had been able to gather. In the meantime, the largest, lushest portion of the nation was slowly being taken over by malicious forces, and those forces were expanding. Link took a deep breath, hardening his resolve, and met Telma's eyes again.
Thank you, but I do not think I could forgive myself for turning my back now. I was given a second chance. I must do what I can.
Telma smiled warmly and he could tell she was pleased with his answer.
Good man.
She patted his shoulder heavily.
Take care of yourself, Link. I am sure that we will cross paths again someday in the future.
They parted ways after that. Telma headed west, explaining that the only road leading to the Zora's domain passable by cart was on the other side of the dueling peaks. Link expressed concern over her journey, but she waved it off and told him that that road was still fairly secure to ensure trade did not falter. Her tone held an edge to it, though, that suggested she was still concerned. The road to the Sheikah village was supposed to be kept safe as well. Link, meanwhile, rode north on the road until it forked to the east. The eastern road winded around the north side of the large, swampy field where Link had seen the ruins and guardians the day before. Spirit seemed to be well rested and Link allowed him to alternate between walking and trotting. As a result, he made fairly good time, moving at a quicker pace than he had been able to while traveling alongside Telma's cart. He stopped to give Spirit, and himself, a break around midday, when the sun was overhead. He sat down with his back against a large, broken stump next to the road and ate a meal of dried fruit and carrots. After he finished eating, he removed his Sheikah slate. Impa had told him that the princess had attempted to prepare the Sheikah slate in such a way that she hoped it would spark some memories. What exactly had she meant by that? He examined the icons available on the screen, considering them for a moment. Finally, he sighed and rose, wincing slightly. He was not sure of how he traveled 100 years ago, but it's clear that his body now was not used to traveling by horse. After 2 days of horse travel, it was beginning to ache just moving around. With Ha-Ten-O being another 2 days riding away, he sincerely hoped to be able to stay there at least a few days before getting back on the road. He looked over at Spirit, who was placidly eating some grass, and decided that the horse would be fine for a few minutes. Link stepped further away from him and lifted the slate, inspecting it. Finally, he pressed the blue remote bomb rune. Again, the glowing blue ball appeared on the ground in front of him. Careful not to press the button a second time by accident, Link knelt, inspecting the explosive device. He reached out with a hesitant finger, touching it, finding it to be quite solid. He placed the slate down on the ground and picked the bomb up, hefting it in his hands. It was not extremely heavy, but it had a definite weight to it. After turning it over in his hands for a few seconds, Link looked down the hill he was standing on, making sure there were no people around, and then he threw it. The bomb sailed through the air and then hit the ground. It did not explode, however, and simply continued to roll down the hill, picking up speed as it went. Link picked back up his Sheikah slate and pressed the blue bomb rune again. Distantly, the bomb exploded in a flash of blue light and with an audible crack that rang out through the air. A flock of large pink birds nearby took flight, squawking angrily. Nearby, on a rocky shelf, a horned mountain goat bayed. Spirit snorted anxiously. Where the bomb had been, there was now a black circle of scorched grass and earth. Link decided that this rune would, in fact, be useful in certain situations as long as he was very deliberate with its use. Otherwise he would be just as likely to harm himself as anyone or thing else. Satisfied, Link hooked the Sheikah slate back to his belt and gazed out at the field below. It appeared, to him, to have been a killing field. Dozens of broken guardians littered the area. Some of them were little more than their cylindrical bodies, while others still had all 6 legs and looked ready to start moving again. Some had partially climbed onto pieces of broken buildings, while others lay on their sides, half covered by moss. What had happened here? Why had so many gathered in this place, and how had they all broken down? Neither the king, nor Impa, had mentioned how the Guardians had been defeated. Link felt slightly more hopeful at the thought the last time they had fought Ganon, they had to contend with these things, right? But if they had been defeated, then Ganon would be lacking a very powerful weapon that he had before. He wasn't sure how much it was, but it was something. At least, he hoped so. It was late in the afternoon when Link reached a massive stone wall, which he had been told was called Fort Ha-Ten-O. The closer he got to the fort, the more Link began to dread his arrival. Guardians. Guardians were everywhere. They had clearly been to the point of climbing over each other to reach the fort when whatever had destroyed them had been used. But even though they were inert now, the sheer number of them that had closed in on Fort Ha-Ten-O were terrifying. Link could only imagine what it must have been like for the defenders here as they watched dozens of the metal beasts crossing the marshy field, closing in. The fort, itself, didn't even look finished. While some sections of it were made of brick and mortar, other sections had been constructed of hastily placed stones and even wood, which had mostly rotted and collapsed in the last 100 years. The wall had been erected in the canyon between two sheer cliff faces, and extended for several miles, even crossing a lazily flowing river to the south. Behind the wall, Link would see that the canyon continued, with cliffs, plateaus, bluffs, and even a distant mountain. Eager to get away from the mass of guardians, Link rode Spirit under the ancient iron portcullis and into what appeared to be a peaceful forest. He glanced back through the fort's gate, still able to see several guardians that appeared to have been frozen in motion, much like Link's stasis rune froze objects in place. They would have destroyed this forest, if they had gotten through. Shuddering, Link looked forward again and continued on. He finally set up camp that night some distance past the fort. He had followed the river as it winded around and under a large bluff. Occasionally, he passed some other travelers on the road, who assured him that he was on the right path, but that he still had at least a full day's journey ahead of him.
I don't know if I would camp here,
said one such traveler, an older man, as he rode past where Link had dismounted.
They say restless spirits inhabit this place. Soldiers killed in an ancient war thousands of years ago.
He motioned across the road to a break in the ridge, where a small valley had formed in the shadow of the rocky hills. Among the sparse trees and grass, Link could see the shapes of dozens of grave markers. Link thanked the man for his information but made no indication of moving on. He was tired, as was Spirit. They had traveled enough for one day. The old man moved on, having said all that he wanted to say, and Link continued on making his camp. Later that night, as he made camp for a second time under the light of the moon and stars, he told himself that he hadn't seen shadowy figures moving among the grave markers, and he most definitely hadn't seen a pair of violet eyes staring out at him in the darkness. He made camp near the place that the road to Ha-Ten-O split. One path continued its easterly route while the other led south, looping around a nearby lake. There was a Sheikah tower in the direction of this southerly path, but Link ultimately decided that he would continue moving east in the morning. If he felt so inclined, he would activate the tower on his way back, assuming he could figure out what use they served. Perhaps this Pura would know better. As he made camp that night, using the supplies that Telma had given him to craft a simple lean-to, he was struck that his added companion of Spirit still did not quite satisfy the sense in his heart that something was missing. Once again, he attempted to reach out to the princess, hoping for some kind of reply. She had spoken to him when he woke several times. He truly hoped that her hesitance to speak now was not indicative of her own powers weakening. Dire thoughts of what would happen if he failed to complete his journey quickly enough plagued his thoughts that night as he fell asleep. End of chapter.